Hello, hello, hello. How are you guys doing today? Welcome to Peter Watches TV. And today I want to talk about the new Hulu show called Under the Bridge. I just finished it 2 nights ago. It was unbelievable. So unbelievable, so sad, so tragic, but a really, really great. I mean, probably one of the best TV shows I have watched in a very, very long time. In fact, my friend Tanya and I were talking the other day, and we're like, it's no surprise that nobody wants to go to the movie theater anymore because they're putting out better TV shows than they're putting out movies anymore, And we were talking about Eric, and then we talked about it again the other night because I just finished Under the Bridge, and she had watched it. And they're putting out these fantastic shows, like unbelievable shows, right? And I'm loving it. But some of these shows kind of weigh heavy on me after I get done with them, and Under the Bridge was definitely one of those shows that I couldn't get out of it after I stopped watching it. I will say, trigger warning to a lot of issues. Okay, there's all kinds of issues in the show, and I was just kind of like, when I got done with it, I was like, okay. My husband had woken up from a nap, and I finished it, and I was like, I think I finished it on Saturday, and I was like, saying to him, I was like, this is it was so good, but it was so dark, and it was so sad. So last night, I was looking for something new to watch, and I was like, I need to watch another dark, thing. I was going to watch the Kevin Spacey documentary, and then I was going to watch the Nick and Aaron Carter thing. And then all these different things I was going to watch. I was like, I need a break from this for a while. So a couple nights ago, I started watching Survivor Season 1. So for those of you that don't know, I'm going back and I'm watching all the seasons of Survivor. And so I think I watched the first 1 through 10 or something back in the day, in real time. And I remember them, but I don't remember everything about them at all. And so I went back. Last night I watched 6 or 7 episodes of Survivor Season 1 with Richard Hatch and Susan the truck driver and Colleen and Rudy the Navy SEAL and stuff like that. You guys, if you are Survivor fans, go back and watch Season 1. Okay, it is so low budget. It is not the Survivor that you know today. And I had kind of forgotten about what it was really like in the early days of Survivor. And, I'm going to do a whole video about it when I finish Season 1, but it's crazy going back and watching it. So I needed kind of a little bit of a break after I finished Under the Bridge. It really, to be honest with you, it weighed heavy on me a lot. For those of you that don't know, I have been sober since December 17th of 1994. I've been sober for 29 years. I'm actively involved in a 12-step program. And when I was in high school, I ran with a rough crowd. I just did, and was rough myself, and got into a lot of trouble, a lot of legal trouble and things like that. And I've talked a lot about that in multiple videos, through multiple years, many years at this point online. And so there was a lot that I related to in this show, and it's interesting because my cousin Caroline, we were talking, and I said, what's a show I should watch? This was last week, and she said, you need to watch Under the Bridge. And I said, Under the Bridge, what is it? And I was confusing it with a show that I'd watched a couple years ago that was a mystery thriller too. And I think it was just called The Bridge. And it was about 2 detectives, one from Mexico and one from the United States, that it dealt with immigration and things like that. And I remember starting to watch it, but I don't think I finished the entire show. I was watching it when it came out, and I didn't keep up with the whole show. And she's like, no, it's not about that at all. That's not the show. The show is new on Hulu. And she's like, the reason I really like it is because it's has these girls that are were my age in it. And I'm like, okay. And so she's like, yeah, from the 80s and whatever. Now, my cousin Caroline graduated from high school in 1987. I graduated in 1990. So I start watching this show, and I read the synopsis for it, and I was like, this show takes place in 1997, okay? And it's based on a true story. I didn't realize how much of it was true in the story until I started researching it. And so I called Caroline, and I said, what are you talking about? This, it takes place in 97. She's like, not the 2 main characters. They graduated 10 years before. Because I kind of put it together. I was like, is she talking about the 2 main characters? Because the 2 main characters, the police officer and this writer journalist, they graduated 10 years before. And I was like, she's like, yeah. She was like, a lot of the music, they play Susie and the Banshees, The Cure, The Smiths, stuff like that. They play it when she's listening to music, The Reporter. So let me get in here before I get into any more of this and read you a little synopsis about this. This is from Vanity Fair, or this is from Esquire. Set in 1997 in Santa Canada, the show tracks the disappearance and murder of Rena Verk, a 14-year-old girl who went missing after attending a party. Under the Bridge is based on a true story which author Rebecca Godfrey told in her book of the same name. Okay, so what it's about is that this journalist, Rebecca Godfrey, has not been back to Victoria, Canada, in 10 years. And she comes back, and you realize very quickly she's like staying with her parents, and it's beautiful. The scenery is beautiful, but it's this very small town, and you realize there's a tragedy that has occurred in the family. And you find out later the tragedy is that her brother drowned. They don't actually really get into a lot of the story of that. I thought at some point they would get into more of the story of that, but they don't really ever. They really kind of just reference that they went through media frenzy like this Rena Verk's family does. And so that kind of makes her see it in a different way. So she's kind of very like hard-edged. Now, I did not know at the time when I was watching this, somebody commented this on my vlog, that Riley Keough, who is Priscilla Presley's daughter, plays the journalist in this. I was like, I don't know who these women are. It was funny because afterwards I was like looking these, I started on the last episode. When I'm watching shows, I'm like, do you guys do this? I like Wikipedia all the people, and I look them up and what they've been in and stuff like that. So I didn't look her up because I was like, I don't recognize her. And I was like, oh my God, I watched Daisy Jones and the Six, and it's the same girl. I don't think I finished a book, Daisy Jones and the Six, but I don't think I finished a show. But I didn't recognize her at all. And I was like, and my best friend Tanya loves her, and I was kind of surprised she didn't say anything about it. So anyway, she plays the journalist. And then she comes back home, and her best friend / former girlfriend, lover, you don't really ever know, is played by Lily Gladstone, who was just nominated for Best Actress in Killers of the Flower Moon with Leonardo DiCaprio. And the whole time I was watching it, I was like, she doesn't look familiar to me at all. And it was so funny because as soon as I read that, I could like see her at the Academy Awards sitting in the audience. Like when they read her name, I was like, oh my God, it's the same woman. Like I was like, I had never seen her before. So it's about this journalist, and she comes home to Victoria, Canada, and she's been living in New York, and she comes home to write this book about the girls of Victoria, Canada, kind of like the lost girls of Victoria, Canada. One of the things that's important to note that they don't really talk about in this book, but that at the time that she would have been writing this book, she doesn't come home to write a true crime book. She comes home to write a book just about like the lost girls of Victoria, Canada. At the time that she wrote this book, which was 1997, okay, these books were really, really big. These books, like, I think it was called Reviving Ophelia, which was about, like, all the troubles that teenage girls go through. And then after that, there was a book, I think it was called, like, Raising Cain or something like that. And it was about boys and, like, what boys go through. And then there were books that were coming out about kids without a conscience. Like, these were big, hot topics at that time. Like how to set boundaries and limits, and, you know, kids with eating disorders and drug problems and all this kind of stuff. I mean, they're still big topics today, obviously, right? But in the mid to late 90s, like, those were hot topics. Those books were, like, best-selling books that people were talking about all the time. And I think that that's important to note, because it's not like she just comes home to, like, that book would have done very well on its own if she had just written a book about the lost girls that, like, nobody wants. I mean, when we talk about, like, throwaway kids, that was, like, a big term at that time. I don't even know if that's the term they use today. But, like, throwaway kids and kids that were homeless, like, that was a huge topic at that time in society, and there were a lot of books about it. And so she comes home to write this book. So she starts meeting these kids, these girls that are at this group home called Seven Oaks, okay? And you find out later, she doesn't really, like, she was there at one time, and then this Cam that is played by Lily Gladstone, that's the police officer, she was there when she was younger because she was adopted. And so they all have this connection with this group home. They don't really go into much detail of what their experience was there, except for like the curfews and things like that. Which is interesting because this police officer is like, well, the curfew used to be this. And I'm like, okay, but she says they brought her there when she was like really young. And I'm like, okay, so you were like a baby and then you were adopted. Some of its story, it doesn't make sense, but it doesn't really matter because the show is so good. So anyway, she starts interviewing these girls, and the main girl that she interviews is this girl named Josephine, and she's kind of like the ringleader of the show. I will tell you, the show reminds me of, I don't know if you guys remember the movie that came out years ago. I think it was based on a true story too, and it was called Bully, and it was about a bunch of kids in Florida that like killed somebody. And then it reminds me of that. It reminds me of the TV show Euphoria a lot. And in fact, one of the kids that's in the show was actually in Euphoria. Because I was like, I know him from somewhere. And I looked him up. It was the guy that played Warren in the show. And he was actually in Euphoria. I think he was in season 1 and he gets killed. And then he's off the show. So she starts interviewing this girl, Josephine, and she's kind of the ringleader. Like, she wants to work for John Gotti, and she wants to be, like, one of Gotti's girls, and she wants to prove to him, like, what a badass she is. And so she says to this journalist, Rebecca, that she will do interviews with her in exchange for her taking her to New York and, like, introducing her to John Gotti, right? So the journalist kind of leads her on a little bit and takes her out to eat and things like that, and the girl's just, like, trying to show what a badass she is and whatever. At the same time that this is going on, like during those same days, this Rena Verk, who lived at the group home and made these allegations of SA towards her father so that she could live in the group home, even though they had no bearing in truth whatsoever, per the show, I don't know, but per the show, she did it just so she could be part of these girls. So this girl felt like she never fit in, and it discusses a lot of racism in there. Her parents are from India, so she feels like she's an outsider. She feels like these kids are making fun of her, and so she'll do anything to fit in with them. And so she moves into this group home, and she becomes friends with them, and then she feels bad about what she said about her dad, so she moves out, she moves home, but she still wants to be in good with the girls. And so she goes over there and she's hanging out with them, and the girls are real mean to her and they don't invite her to a party. And so she steals this book of this Josephine's and this nail polish, and she puts the nail polish on, and then she calls all these people, and she tells all these people that this Josephine girl has AIDS and she's had multiple abortions. She says all these like horrible things about her, right, that are not true. And so then this girl's like, I'm gonna show her that, like, who I am. And so she comes up with this plan to basically beat her ass. At one point, she tells this character, Dusty, who is probably my favorite character in the whole show, who is actually, I found out later, there is no real Dusty. Most of the characters were based on real people. Josephine is a real person. Warren is a real person. Kelly is a real person. Rena Verk was a real person. The writer's a real person. But Dusty, who was one of the girls that lived in the group home, she was actually like a combination of several different people that they used like as a characterization. But I loved her because and she just was somebody that was just like tried to be so honest and so real at the end, and she had let her friend down and she felt horrible for it. And she's the one that gives this Warren guy advice and says, like, like the only way through the truth is like, or through these nightmares that they're having is like to tell the truth and be honest. And she gets on stand and she says, we're part of all this. So anyway, this Joe girl tells her that they're good because they have this gang, and the gang is called CMC, something Mafia Cartel. I can't remember this. Crips Mafia Cartel. Because the guys have, like, Crips blood. And so, or they're like the Crips, and then there's, like, the Bloods, which in 1997 in Victoria, Canada is interesting. But, so the girls want to have their own gang. So they start this gang called CMC. And so this Rena girl wants to be in CMC, but they won't let her in. And so, since this Joe girl is mad at her, she tells this Dusty girl, we'll beat her in. So they invite this girl to this party, this Rena Verk girl, and she's 14, and they lead her down to the bridge. She's running for her life, and they take her down underneath this bridge, and they beat her. And so anyway, then you don't really know what happens to her. It comes out later in the show that what happened was that this Joe girl put a cigarette out between her eyes, like a bindi, like an Indian bindi, and then they kick her and they beat her. This Warren guy kicks her one time. All these girls are kicking her and they're beating her. She gets up. She goes across the bridge. Warren and this Kelly girl, Kelly is Josephine's best friend. You want to talk about a kid without a conscience. This girl seems like in the show that she is a kid without a conscience. Like, she has no remorse, nothing for what she did. And she does everything for this Josephine girl because she wants this Josephine girl to, like, be so loyal to her. So they follow Rena Verk across the bridge, and then they beat her some more, and then they take her pants off and her boots, and they drown her. And, Kelly drowns her, and Warren stands there, and he's, like, beat her some more and stuff, but he stands there and he doesn't say anything. He doesn't tell her not to do it, and whatever. So, over the course of this, the show, it's a lot about the investigation into what really happened, getting to know these kids, the writers getting to know the kids, the police investigators trying to get to major crimes unit, and so she's like really taking this on. She really wants to investigate this. This is really important to her, and so it's really bringing their personal stories in as well. She finds out through the thing that there's like, she was adopted off of this Native American reservation or Indigenous reservation in Canada, and that she was taken from her family, and that she wasn't, like, her dad had always told her that she was abused. She finds out later that these bruises that she allegedly had on her body were actually a birthmark that she has, and she was never bruised by her family. And they basically were stealing Indigenous kids off of these reservations in Canada to give to white families. So, like, there's all these huge issues that go on there. Drugs are a huge issue in the show. And so it's really about finding out about these kids, where they come from. This Warren kid that is part of the killing, he's in the girls' gang, even though he's not a girl. And he's part of the killing. You find out that, like, his dad is left, his mom's left, and he doesn't really know where he belongs and stuff. And so most of it's the court trial. Warren takes a lot of responsibility. He gets life in prison because he has really no money and no family. This Kelly girl, Kelly Ellard, she goes crazy on the stand, starts mouthing off to the attorneys and to the judge and everything like that, starts beating her fist on there. She gets convicted of second-degree murder as well as Warren, but she gets 5 years instead of life in prison because she's gotten good grades and she comes from a good family. It shows really about how the justice system is so skewed and how it works against people from diverse backgrounds, and how it plays into racism and, economic background and things like that. It's really sad. What's interesting about this, and then that's kind of how it ends, and the police officer decides she doesn't want to be a police officer anymore, and she's going to go find her family that she was taken from originally. And so she finds out, like, what tribe she's from, and she goes and they show her, like, finding her family. The journalist decides that she's going to go back to New York and all this kind of stuff, and then they show what happens to the kids. The other kids that were involved in the beating, they all got a year in detention, and then that was it. So Josephine, Dusty, these other girls, there's 2 other girls, they all got a year of jail time, and then they were going to be released after that. So apparently, I looked into some of this stuff. Josephine had escaped twice, and so she had to do more time than she was supposed to. And she came out and did an interview like 4 years ago, and it was the only time she's ever spoken about it. And I will tell you, it's so eerie when you look at the picture of her today, because she looks very similar to the girl that played her in the movie. I mean, it's like, I think they picked characters. Like, the girl that plays Rena Burke, looks a lot like her. It goes in and it tells the whole history of her grandparents moving from India to the United States, and her parents meeting, and that whole story, and how to become Jehovah's Witnesses. That story is very, very interesting. Religion plays a huge factor in this story as well, and there being witnesses, and what that implies, and what that means, and things to them. It also has a huge issue with them not getting along with Rena, and why she acts out, and things like that. The culture of all these different people's backgrounds is really heavily played into the show, and fantastically done, honestly, and really well represented as far as, like, really showing the characters of these people and who they are. When I went and I looked at it, I was kind of surprised. So it says it's at the end of the show, but I went and looked at it more. The author, she worked for 2.5 years on the screenplay for the show with another writer, and then she died at the age of 59 from lung cancer. So the writer has since passed away, Rebecca Godfrey, who is the one that was in this. Warren, who is the one that was given life in prison, the mother of the victim of Rena Burke comes to him. They show this in the show, and basically offers him mercy. It's like the very last episode, I think it's called something like, the second to last episode is called Mercy. And she comes to him, and he basically says how bad he feels for what happened, and that he wished she had never done that, and all this kind of stuff, and so she forgives him. Warren served approximately 9 or 10 years in prison, and then her parents, Rena Burke's parents, advocated for his release because they felt like he had taken accountability and responsibility, and so he was released. He now works on placing Indigenous children back in their homes that they were taken from, because he too was somebody that lived that was from a tribe, and that was something that worked against him in the case. And he also works in reunification for people that are getting out of prison. So he's devoted his entire life to this. Kelly Ellard got 5 years in prison. She appealed that, and then she got life in prison, and then appealed that, and then there was a mistrial, and so she's basically been in prison since 1998, and the last appeal went through in 1997. I might have got those. It might have been a mistrial, then she got life in prison, and she's appealing that again, and the last appeal was in 2017. She's been in prison all this time. She's currently, this is what's interesting to me, my friend Tanya and I were talking about this, she's currently on day release from prison, which basically means like it's work release. Like, you can go out and work, or you can go out and day release means that you can go out and do whatever you want to do, right? So she's had 2 children in day release, which means she's hooking up and having sex and getting pregnant while she's on day release in prison. So she's had 2 kids while she's in prison all this time. And she's still in prison to this day. She's on day release in prison in Canada. So interesting. And she really has never come out and taken any accountability. She remains her story that she had nothing to do with this and she wasn't involved. The show shows CCTV footage of the kids going under the bridge and who came back out underneath there. It just doesn't show Warren and Kelly going across the bridge and beating her and drowning her. It's a fantastically well done show. I will tell you, if you watch it, it is so sad, but I really think it's an important show. When I was watching it, I was like looking at the different people because I was like, how do I know this person from that? And like when I looked up, like the 3rd or 4th person I looked up was like Warren. And I was like, it said something about him being on Euphoria. And I was like, he was on Euphoria? Because I've watched all the seasons of Euphoria. My husband and I watch it. And I was like, who? I think he was like at the drug dealer's house and he got shot. And I think that's who he was on the show. I don't really remember him. But what it made me realize was this show reminds me a lot of Euphoria. It reminds me a lot of, if you remember the movie Kids back in the day, about AIDS in New York City, and that these very vulnerably honest, raw movies that depict what kids are like. And I think that why I related to that movie when it first came out, Kids, back in the day with the skaters in New York City drinking out of 40s, was because that was my experience when I was growing up. And I know that not every kid's experience is like that, but my experience in high school was very dark and drug-filled and alcohol-filled and things like that. And so I appreciate shows that show the raw honesty of situations like this, even if that's not everybody's truth, even if that's not everybody's story. I know that there are a lot of teenagers out there that make good choices and aren't engaging in these kinds of things today, but I think it's important for us to continue to ask the question, you know, what can we do so that these things don't happen again? In Indiana, where I live, a case that I have been interested, a true crime case I've been interested in for years and years and years, ever since I read the book by Aphrodite Jones back in the day. It's called Cruel Sacrifice. It was about Shanda Shear. Shanda Shear was a 12-year-old girl that was murdered, I believe, in 1990 in Madison, Indiana, and 3 girls killed her. They put her in the trunk of her car. It was all based over jealousy that this one girl had over Shanda Shear because she was dating her ex-girlfriend. And they put her in the trunk of a car. They beat her with a tire iron. They did other things with a tire iron. And they set her on fire to burn. And they left her for dead, burning out in the middle of nowhere. You know, it's interesting because when you look at that case, these were girls that started their day going, just driving around, hanging out here, hanging out there. At the end of the day, somebody was murdered. This is a situation that's very similar to that, right? And we talk a lot about emotional development and things like that and not thinking through things, you know? And these are kids making very adult decisions that are ending people's lives. Rena Verk lost her life because of the kids' choices at this time. A life was lost. It's extremely sad, you know, of what this girl could have gone on to do or be part of in this world, what she could have contributed to. The show is fantastically done, and it's very important to watch. Anyway, if you've watched it, let me know what you think in the comment section below. I love you guys, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.